Alrighty then, week 6, day 1, find my place. Let's get down to work. Any questions, comments from the reading or our journey so far? Yes, Eddie.
Do you think the Crusades are a consciously direct response to the Moorish invasion of Spain?
You know, it's possible. It's possible.
I don't know how much time elapsed between the one and the other.
You know, slavery is traumatic. One of the things that we could talk about, but I definitely do talk about next term, is epigenetics. Have you heard of that? Okay. So basically epigenetics, from a certain point of view where ancestral memory is stored as memory and passed on unconsciously or consciously. You know, slavery was traumatic. It doesn't matter that they let you read and write and teach you to read and write and give you a fairly decent job and feed you. You know, it's still traumatic. Being a sex slave is traumatic. However, you know, if you, for example, Google that term odalisque, I decided not to use any of those images because even though they're classical things, because, you know, depicting women as nude, wait, they're sex slaves and they're harem, yeah.
Objects.
Yeah, objects. They're still objects. Slavery is slavery. I'm not saying that it's better because black people are doing it, even though black people's slaves, you know, were reading and writing. That's slightly better than America, but not great. You know, if I'm going to be completely intellectually honest about that. So I didn't learn about Europeans being enslaved from European history. You don't learn that in America, right? So it's a book written by a British historian who's reading Arabic. And he's reading it at a time when what is happening, and when we get to that particular time period, Europe is basically dividing up Africa. For slavery and for exploitation. And because it's the end of the Ottoman Empire and they can do that without much opposition. So were the Crusades revenge for slavery? It's hard to say. I wouldn't doubt it. Wouldn't doubt it.
At least it could be an element within the larger picture.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. But, you know, since they don't talk about that, you can't actually definitively claim that. You know, it's very similar to, you know, so for example, and when we get to this time period, and it's not till next year, but I can basically, you know, parenthetically say it because I actually gave a speech about it, you know, a couple of times recently. The dominant mythology about the Ku Klux Klan in Eugene, according to historians who basically go through a standard of evidence, right? Like, did it appear in a newspaper? Do you have a picture? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we're not going to believe your word. Okay, so according to that, right, the Klan died in 1924. But the people who say that were Klan controlled. So can we trust the Klan to inform on the Klan? No. But on the other hand, a historian who's not down with the Klan basically has to go on the evidence. In ethnic studies, we have different standards of evidence where we basically say, look, people who were there, who lived and experienced it, you know, say that this and this and this happened. To which the historian will reply, well, people are willing to use the imagery of the Klan to achieve the same effect, and we can't say that's the Klan. Even if we have a membership list, because not everybody who's a Klan member is on the membership list, and lots of people who are on the membership list might not be a actual Klansman. I'm not sure how you justify that last statement, but it is a quote, and I'm just, repeating it. So, when bin Laden said that 9/11 was because of the West's involvement in creating a secular Turkey. Okay, that's 80 years before. You serious? Really? I mean, I would have believed revenge for getting bombed in Afghanistan. That I would have believed. Turkey, that's a stretch. But a lot of folks within that particular axiology have long memories. Black people ain't about to give up, slavery. No. Get over slavery. No, not so much. We ain't gonna do that. So if we're not gonna go get over slavery, why would bin Laden get over Turkey from 80 years ago?
Because our foreign policy's been playing those games since way before that.
Yeah, it's true. It is very true. So let me find my place. Christian Discovery, Crusade, Stare Decisis, Foundations of Whiteness.
That was the last one.
Right, okay. We talked about Blumenbach, maybe not yet. All right, bringing the light to the unwashed masses. Let's start there. Oh, and by the way, it's midterm day, so I'll be handing those out. And for those of you in online land, it will be up after 3 o'clock today on the Moodle site. It's take-home open book, so the book is not only What's Ever Nascente, but also all the PowerPoints. It's also fair game too, and you have a week to complete it. It's due back, close of business, i.e. 5 o'clock next Wednesday. Monday we're not meeting because it's President's Day. All right, so there we go. Go to slide, please. So if you're going to found a concept where you're going to create racial supremacy, you have to create a concept of race to be able to do that. I mean, people can notice differences, but there wasn't really a documented concept of racism. So just going back, for example, to say the Ku Klux Klan, do you only believe the written documentation? If somebody burns a cross on your lawn on 9/11 or a week after 9/11, is that Klan activity? If somebody phones in a bomb threat at the Martin Luther King celebration because Martin Luther King III is there, this is 1988 in Eugene, and he says, I'm the Ku Klux Klan and we're phoning in a bomb threat, is that really the Ku Klux Klan? Or would they bother? Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? But they're willing to, use the cover, right? So you can't have whiteness without a concept of race yet. And so part of that foundation that we'll often see with starting with various types of infrastructure is you start with a mandate from God, and helps if you help God write or edit the mandate. And part of that mandate starts with it starts definitely before the King James Version of the Bible, right? With the Inquisition, as we were looking at last Monday, with the Catholic Church basically saying Christians are white and we're going to persecute you because you have Moorish or Jewish blood, by which we understand darker skin, because otherwise how do you know that? King James Version of the Bible. So James gathers 12 white scholars who, in their edit job, basically leave out about 200 books, especially those with African reference, changes the biblical references, for example, with words like tyrant, where it says the word is actually tyrant, and they change it to kings. So, yeah, okay. And they use Hebrew and Greek, but not Aramaic. as the source text. Okay, I mean, I guess it's a call, the editors can do whatever they want. So, religious authority and the secular authority enforce God's will on earth. And by the way, God's will is what we've edited to say. And this is basically in line with the Council of Nicaea, who is doing essentially the same thing. In 300, 370, I guess it is, right? Just before the fall of Rome. We're going to basically set this down as this is what Christian doctrine is going to be. And so James simply reinforces that. But the reason I'm putting out, not so much putting down the King James Version of the Bible, is that both the Ku Klux Klan and Martin Luther King used this as the basis for their actions, as well as colonialists in America. So, Christian supremacy, and Christian in this concept that Christian means white only. And then we start looking at the whole issue around blood or racial purity. That is, you're pure white or you're pure black, and basically we don't want mixtures of the races. So this becomes the meme where I've heard it in America. Well, God made the races separate on different continents, and they're supposed to be kept separate. Well, wait a minute. What about the fact that people have boats and people can migrate? If they're separate, what? God don't want them to walk? I mean, right? It doesn't. The logic falls apart, right? So just understand, racism doesn't necessarily mean, it may be illogical, it may not make sense, but people believe it anyway. And it doesn't mean that it's no less powerful just because it's fictional. So basically then the superior civilizing influence of quote-unquote Western civilization, where Western itself means white, as we saw in the dictionary definitions. Okay, Northern European or North and South America, et cetera, et cetera. Well, wait, not the indigenous people? Oh, so Western means white. Okay. Occidental versus Oriental, that's also, from England, the Occident. And then the concept of bringing the light, that is the light of our new form of Christianity, to the unwashed masses. That is, the heathen, the people living out in the sticks, the people living out in the heather, the pagan, the etc., right? So, once you have the religious and political authorities on the same page, then, as we talked about Monday, the whole doctrine of discovery, when Columbus discovered America, we weren't taught, and I wasn't taught, so I know you weren't taught, that discovery was a legal process. Oh, you thought, it was just, I found this. Well, no. I found it, and, it's like Wade Noble said, I don't know who you are, but you Indians now. And because you Indians, you lost title to your own land, your ancestral homeland. Doesn't matter that you've been living there since, at least 10,000 years before Columbus got there. So it's long enough to be considered your homeland. You lose it. The Academy, then, the explorers claimed territory for crown and church. All right? And then the Academy weighs in to give secular justification. So, for example, Johann Friedrich Blumenbach at Göttingen writes in 1770 a racial classification, Caucasian, Caucasoid, Mongoloid, Negroid, and this is based on the Bible. Because the ark, Noah's Ark landed, and of course Noah was white. Why, just look at the Russell Crowe movie, right? Or Exodus, Christian Bale, looks like Moses. Yeah, sure. Yeah, Caucasus, because the ark landed on Mount Ararat in the Caucasus Mountains. The people who descended from Noah are white people, Caucasoid. and then they moved into Asia and devolved further from the superior white race, and they're Mongoloid. And then people devolve from there, and it's a Negroid. So, right, God clearly made white people superior and black people inferior, and that's why, oh, well, let's forget about the pyramids. Let's forget about your book coming out of Africa. Let's forget about all that stuff. Yeah.
So they're trying to justify a kind of reverse evolution.
Yes.
Which is
Essentially, right. Reverse evolution, right? So, I mean, that's why when we saw, at the beginning of class that, from that Christian website about you have, the anthropoid, the hominids, and then, on the right, white man, well, wait a minute. You don't believe in evolution, but you believe in your supremacy. Why is that? So, George II. So, House of Hanover. George II. So it's George I, George II, George III. The House of Hanover from Germany rules on the throne of England. George II imports Blumenbach's ideas, among others, that university's curriculum to England.
Where is Blumenbach from?
He's German, at Göttingen.
Which was a university.
Yeah, a major university. In fact, one of the, if you were to translate in the concept of, the U of O and OSU having a rivalry,
Right.
Göttingen had a famous rivalry with another German school like Heidelberg or something like that.
Oxford and Cambridge.
Yeah, Oxford and Cambridge,
Harvard
right,
and Yale.
right. Harvard and Yale, right. Right, these universities, there's this tradition. It's interesting in terms of having rivalries, who's better, who's the smartest, who makes the best discoverer. Yeah, who can do that, right? So, anyway, that curriculum basically gets imported to England from Germany because it's a German ruler on the throne, right? And what's he going to decree, right? And so you're going to send, so the issue then becomes not the issue so much, but does it not then follow that what's the curriculum going to be imported to the English colonies? Right? Canada and America, right? Tommy, Jeff, and those folks, they were, educated in universities on American soil, but what would that curriculum have been? This one, the Columbus discovered America narrative. Right? So thence it comes to America for the education of the colonies. And, there are exceptional others in other races, and they're exceptional not like others of their race because, quote, they are like us. And we'll talk about Afro-Europeans, maybe later this hour, but certainly later in the, either next week or something like that. But just, starting with the foundation of whiteness. So understand that these Germans, French, Europe itself, these countries were not wholly white. They had people of color, they had black people. So people of color does not just mean black people, even though a lot of people would like to think that. They're people of multiple races because these folks have colonies. And the colonies, they colonized, other places, particularly Africa. So those colonials had come to Europe to live and mix and intermarry. Plus, black people have been coming up into Europe since easily 1,000, and definitely during the Dark Ages as well as before. So Europe is not white, not totally white. So, and because, these folks are like us, that is, they've assimilated or acculturated into our ways, that proves our supremacy. So, starting the foundations of American whiteness. So that's the philosophical basis for European whiteness. So, starting in 1619, This is where, so you notice, as of course, one of the reasons you're taking the class is I don't start in 1619 like everybody else does. Start in 15,000. It's better, more better, right? But starting in 1619, Turtle Island, North America was populated by Indian nations, European colonists, European indentured servants, white and black, African slaves, Indian slaves, and so-called free Negroes, some of them living alongside whites, some of them living in maroon communities and republics. So, for example, indentured servants. So the indenture is you pay, your passage to America gets paid, but you have to work it off. Pretty much like a slave. So indentured servants could be beaten and flogged, raped, etc. by their masters, and as bad as slaves could be. With the difference being slaves were considered property. Yeah, indentured servants were almost property too, but they were property working off their debt. So as soon as their debt was paid, they're free. So these servants, white, black, female, male, as well as Indians, would often find common cause and rebelled against the wealthy upper classes, which were, of course, almost always white. So, for example, I don't know if I have this particular graphic here. Might fly it in for next week. But you've heard of Wall Street? You know what Wall Street was?
I think it was literally a wall to keep the other elements out.
Well, which other elements?
Native Americans.
Yeah, but okay, I'm not a geographer, I'm a psych major, right? So this graphic that I have, this is like Lower Manhattan. I don't know if you've ever been to Lower Manhattan. I've been to Lower Manhattan, right? It's kind of like, why don't I have markers that work? Up in here. Slightly better. Okay. Let's say this is Lower Manhattan. And this is Wall Street. So Manhattan's an island in the middle of Iroquois Six Nations territory. Like the entire state of New York, Connecticut, etc., etc. You know, it's like the old, Lone Ranger joke. Tonto, we're surrounded by Indians. What do you mean, we, white man? All right, so Wall Street. Okay, the wall was built by European and African indentured servants to keep Indians out. But not only Indians out, to keep them from escaping. Okay, because remember, this island is surrounded. The whole thing about, buying the land, the Dutch selling, the land to these folks for $24 worth of wampum beads. Well, wait. First of all, the people that you sold it to, they weren't even from there. That's one. Two, natives don't believe in real estate. So maybe you were trading for the right to be there for a little while or giving a gift, but no, you don't own the island, but whatever, they got discovered some title pass, right? So this wall here is to keep Indians out. Wait, you're surrounded. The island is surrounded. They could go anywhere, make landfall anywhere. So really, it's not so much to keep the natives out as to keep these folks in. Go back to slide. And these folks, we're talking about servants who are getting beaten, white, black, male, female. It's to keep them from escaping into Indian country. Because they did. And they would. Because the Indians themselves didn't want, they were being, it was women who were running the country, so to speak, the clan mothers of the Iroquois Confederacy, and any black, white male or black female or white female who made it into Indian country was free. You could stay and become a full-fledged member of the tribe, not be beaten or anything, and live among them, because the Indians weren't giving them back. So that's really more the purpose of the wall. Plus, and this is a conjecture on my part, I will own it. The reason native nations had to be destroyed was because of their acceptance of diversity and their belief in an economy where you didn't have poor people. And that no homeless people, no poor people, no starving people, no racism, no sexism, women did not get sexually abused, children did not get physically abused, there was not public drunkenness, people bathed every day. I mean, all kinds of things that weren't happening in the fledgling colony. So as in a living example of, hey, there's a better way than what you're offering here in America, that's older than what the fledgling colony would be, we need to get rid of that example. Yeah.
With no profit motive.
With no profit motive, because no, why would you have a profit motive? Who do you not feed? Who do you let starve? Right. So, white women and Africans would escape in the Indian country. In Virginia, so the foundations of American whiteness start in Virginia. Everything starts in Virginia. It's really interesting. A series of laws was enacted which would later establish what we call whiteness, at least in America, a series of interlocking and invisible privileges based on race, gender, and class, among other things. So for example, 1640, so 20 years after that first 1619. So that Dutch ship that brought 20 Africans, they were indentured servants, not slaves. They were Dutch citizens. Therefore, citizens. They were Europeans. Because black people have been going up to the Netherlands since the Holy Roman Empire, since the Inquisition, because that was part of the Holy Roman Empire. The Netherlands, Germany, etc. So 1640, 3 indentured servants in New Amsterdam, that's New York, 1 black, 2 white, ran away from their master. When they were caught and brought before the court adds a number of years to the white man's indenture and then sentences the black man to servitude for life. Okay, so they're indentured servants, which means they're Dutch citizens in New Amsterdam. And here we see the beginnings of unequal justice for the same crime. Okay, the law never recognizes racial differences at that time. There were no precedents. So remember what I said the other day about stare decisis, let the decision stand? There had never been a decision like this before. But this started the precedent of a racial bifurcation in the law. (1670), the Virginia Assembly forbids free Negroes and Indians to own Christian white servants. And so that's literally it. Christian means white in their mind. Which, okay, this meme has now been going for close to 200 years at this point. Christian means white. Now, again, if you understand original position, what's the problem? You don't forbid something that isn't happening. Has to be happening to forbid it, right? So obviously, there are free Negroes and Native Americans who can own, by paying whatever the coin of the realm is, to own servants. All right, so indentured servants service could be bought by anyone who paid money. So free Negroes could only have come from Africa or Europe. Most likely Europe, because why would we come from Africa to New England? Cuba?
Yeah.
Costa Rica? South America?
Yeah.
In this time, before the quote-unquote invention of whiteness in America, white people were called Christians. Obviously, the existence of other form of the African and Eastern version of Christianity had been forgotten by Western civilization, because Western is again a code name for white. So those churches continued, but were not necessarily, well, they're written out of the history. So in 1676, it's legal to enslave Indians, which is pretty deep because you're in Indian country, and Iroquois Six Nations are a military power. That takes some cojones. 1680, white Christians allowed to give any Negro or other slave 30 lashes for raising a hand to a Christian. 1705, Virginia forbids whipping white servants naked. I guess they have to wear clothes. All property owned by black slaves, including livestock, is confiscated by the church, and sold to poor whites. Requires masters to give white servants at the end of their indenture corn, money, gun, clothing, 50 acres of land, and reduced poll tax. And you could only vote, if you don't know poll taxes from the days of Jim Crow segregation and illegal voting, you could only vote if you had money to pay the poll tax. And if you've seen the movie Selma, yeah, like they would make you pay a poll tax. If you registered to vote, they'd make you pay a poll tax for every year that you didn't register. Now, there are some that think that this is apocryphal, that is, it's mythological. But you will see that if it is fiction, it certainly resembles actual practice. So Willie Lynch was a planter from the West Indies who had slaves, and you must understand that just like Jews resisted Hitler and fought back, black people are not going into chains willingly, and once they get here in America, they are constantly revolting. Constantly. So, for example, my ex is from Virginia, and one of the reasons that you see tons of buildings built with brick is because black people used to burn them down in slavery. Brick is harder to burn, though you might have wooden floors, etc., right? So, constantly having problems. So, the Willie Lynch letter. So Willie Lynch is a planter brought to Jamestown and for a little, shall we say, consultant. He was a consultant brought in to deal with the slave problem, as you'll see. Gentlemen, I greet you here on the bank of the James River in the year of our Lord, 1712. First, I shall thank you, the gentlemen of the colony of Virginia, for bringing me here. I'm here to help you solve some of your problems with slaves. Your invitation reached me on my modest plantation in the West Indies, where I have experimented with some of the newest and still the oldest methods for control of slaves. Ancient Rome would envy us if my program is implemented. As our boat sailed south on the James River, named for our illustrious king, whose version of the Bible we cherish, I saw enough to know that your problem is not unique. While Rome used cords of wood as crosses for standing human bodies along the old highways in great numbers, you are using the tree and the rope on occasion. Now, he is not the Lynch that invented the term lynching. That was Captain John Lynch, also of Virginia, who was basically a law enforcement officer who, when they basically organized posses to go catch criminals, they would basically catch the criminals and either beat them or hang them upon the spot. Hence the term lynching. Willie Lynch is a different Lynch. No relation. I caught the whiff of a dead slave hanging from a tree a couple of miles back. You're not only losing valuable stock, that's livestock, that's slaves, by hangings, you are having uprisings. Slaves are running away, your crops are sometimes left in the field too long for maximum profit, you suffer occasional fires, your animals are killed. Gentlemen, you know what your problems are. I do not need to elaborate. I'm not here to enumerate your problems. I'm here to introduce you to a method of solving them. In my bag here, I have a foolproof method for controlling your black slaves. I guarantee every one of you, if installed correctly, it will control your slaves for at least 300 years. My method is simple, and members of your family or any overseer can use it. I have outlined a number of differences among the slaves, and I take these differences and make them bigger. I use fear, distrust, and envy for control purposes. These methods have worked on my modest plantation in the West Indies, and it will work throughout the South. Take this simple list of differences, think about them. On top of my list is age, but is only there because it starts with an A. The second is color or shade. There is intelligence, size, sex, size of plantation, status on plantation, attitude of owner, whether the slaves live in the valley or on a hill, east, west, north, south, have fine or coarse hair, or is tall or short. Now that you have a list of differences, I shall give you an outline of action. But before that, I shall assure you that distrust is stronger than trust, and envy is stronger than adulation, respect, or admiration. The black slave, after receiving this indoctrination, shall carry on, emphasis mine here, by the way, and will become self-refueling and self-generating for hundreds of years, maybe thousands. Don't forget, you must pitch the old black versus the young black male, and the young black male against the old black male. You must use the dark-skinned slaves versus the light-skinned slaves, and the light-skinned slaves versus the dark-skinned slaves. You must also have our white servants and overseers distrust all blacks, but it is necessary that your slaves trust and depend on us. They must love, respect, and trust only us. Gentlemen, these kits are your keys to control. Use them. Have your wives and children use them. Never miss an opportunity. My plan is guaranteed, and the good thing about this plan is that if used intensely for 1 year, the slaves themselves will remain perpetually distrustful. Thank you, gentlemen. There are some that say Lynch's letter is, well, somebody made it up. But if it isn't real, it is sure as if it were implemented. So, his strategy is basic divide and conquer. And he's not that Lynch like where lynching came from. Captain John Lynch. So, after the Willie Lynch letter, so again, just think about this as a meme. Memes don't have to be true. They just are successful or not. And this as a meme, worked. And even if somebody made it up in the 20th century, sure looks like it got implemented before then. 1723, free Negroes lose the right to vote, bear arms, or bear witness in court. Thomas Jefferson, good old Tommy founding father Jeff, drafts a law in Virginia which, if enacted, didn't get enacted, would have put black freedmen and freed women, or a white woman who bore a mulatto child, mulatto being the term for a first-generation black-white mix, outside of the law if they remained in the Commonwealth more than a year. So in other words, remained in Virginia. Outside the law means can be killed by anyone with no legal consequences. It's not a crime. So, right, freed, if you're not a slave, you're property. So if you're freed, then you are subject, you're outside of the law, if you remain longer than a year. So you should leave. But what if they kill you before that? Well, it's still not illegal to kill you. And what if you're a white woman that has a kid with a black man? Well, you and the kid are expendable. Notice the reverse isn't true. Now, even though this didn't get enacted, the fact that he wrote it is to again address a problem, right? So similar in its effects, the Willie Lynch letter would have been on blacks. A century later, in 1825, white laborers still refused to work alongside free black laborers. So it didn't matter that the law didn't get enacted, it's still, in effect, is affecting minds and public policy. So Jefferson was clearly of many minds with regards to race, slavery, and the rights of man. He penned an anti-slavery section of the Declaration of Independence where he rails against George III for supporting slavery. He has waged cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life, liberty, and the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere, or to incite miserable death in their transportation hither. This piratical warfare, the opprobrium of infidel powers, is the warfare of the Christian king of Great Britain, determined to keep open a market where men should be bought and sold. Now wait, you're dissing George III for allowing the slave trade to happen. Wait, the slave trade that you're making money from. The slave trade that, you are having sex with your wife's half-sister who's a slave, who looks like your wife, and you have kids with her. But your kids are in slavery. So, of course, he had slaves, as did lots of others, and that particular section was taken out. But there are 9 interlocking articles of the Constitution which protect chattel slavery. So chattel slavery is where chattel, like rhymes with cattle, it's property, your livestock, just like Lynch referred to as stock. So 9 interlocking articles of the Constitution protect slavery. So for example, one by one, this comes from Derek Bell's book, And We Are Not Saved. Article 1, Section 2, representatives of the House were apportioned along the states on the basis of population computed by counting all free persons and 3/5 of the slave. This is the federal number of the 3/5 clause. That is for the purposes of representation. So in other words, the slaves themselves aren't represented. And the whole number of the slaves doesn't go to representation. It's 3/5 of the actual number, and that goes to selecting how many representatives the slave-holding states have. Get that? All right, so blacks were 3/5 of a person. A person is defined in the sense that we the people means essentially rich white men. It didn't mean men, white women, didn't mean Indian nations, free blacks or other people of color. Okay, whites only, democracy. Article 1, Section 2, and Article 1, Section 9, 2 clauses requiring redundantly that direct taxes, including capitations, that is, cap like your head, the head count capitations, be apportioned among the states on the foregoing basis, the purpose being to prevent Congress from laying a head tax on slaves to encourage their emancipation. Article 1, Section 9, Congress was prohibited from abolishing the international slave trade to the United States before 1808. Article 4, Section 2, the states were prohibited from emancipating fugitive slaves who were to be returned on the demand of the master. Article 1, Section 8, Congress was empowered to provide for calling up states' militias to suppress insurrections, including slave uprisings, because slaves could be militant. Article 4, Section 4, the federal government was obliged to protect the states against domestic violence, including slave insurrections. So that's the army if the state didn't have its own militia. Article 5, the provisions of Article 1, Section 9, Clauses 1 and 4 pertaining to the slave trade and direct taxes were made unamendable. Article 1, Section 9 and Article 1, Section 10, these two clauses prohibited the federal government and the states from taxing exports, one purpose being to prevent them from taxing slaves indirectly by taxing the exported products of slave labor. So this is from Derek Bell's And We're Not Saved. Let me show you something. This came from Claude Anderson's book. Let's say, I would make a bad slave. I've been told I'm just too lazy. It's not that I don't like physical labor. I like it selectively. Building rock and roll stages, I like that. Gardening, that's okay. Chopping wood, that's okay. Right? But so, otherwise I'd make a bad slave. So, let's say that you buy a slave for, at the time, $800. Or actually, let's say that this is a female slave, $800, and that a male slave might go for $1,200. So all you have to do once you buy them is feed and clothe them with hand-me-downs. Right? So then, so that last article in the Constitution, okay, which prohibits Congress from taxing stuff that's made by slaves, right? So all you have to do is feed and clothe them, and you don't even have to give them fresh food. You can give them kitchen scraps and stuff like that, and then they also have to hunt and do stuff on their own time after they're off, right? So you could essentially get for free any labor that they did, and if they made products like ironwork, woodwork, furniture, etc., you could sell those at a profit. Okay? So, over the lifetime of a slave, you could make 1,500% profit. Okay, which means that, say, over the lifetime of a, say, female slave, because, slavery, this is where, my Marxist friends might say that, well, there is no such thing as moral capitalism. And I'd say, well, this is amoral capitalism, and, well, you're presuming that capitalism, look, just let's not argue that, okay? Amoral capitalism. So in other words, you could get this woman pregnant that you paid $800 for example, right? And then sell her kids, that is, your kids, at a profit. And not feel anything about that. Like it's okay. And that's what capitalism's American capitalism is based on, because here's what happens with 1,500% profit. That means that each slave, over their lifetime, produces $3 million in value. of the things you can sell from them. And of course, if it's a woman who has kids that you then sell, then that goes up. But each slave, $3 million in 19th, 17th, and 18th, and 19th century dollars, which means 100 times more later. Each slave, $3 million profit over their lifetime. Okay, so you multiply that out then, and it doesn't matter that you don't have slaves, you've benefited from the economy that's created from that. So part of then the interlocking articles was basically not only about money, but it's also just essentially financing a certain lifestyle, shall we say. All right, so American-style capitalism. Adam Smith writes about the moral responsibility of the wealthy to maintain the social contract and the social fabric. Now, Adam Smith wrote, among other things, The Wealth of Nations, which is one of the foundational textbooks, or if you will, books about supporting the idea of capitalism. He was a Methodist minister. And so he says there's a moral responsibility. So profit is good, but the greater good is to use your wealth for the benefit of your community. Okay, not bad, right? So similar to belief that wealth was, similar to that belief was wealth was a gift from God to help you do God's work of reducing misery and suffering. So profit was a good thing, and then wealth was a good thing because if you used it to, like Yeshua said, basically it's easier for a rich man to, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than a rich man to get into heaven. So kind of what he was saying is that once you've got your wealth, it becomes the burden that keeps you from getting into heaven. So what you should do is give it away. So it's an old Christian concept in terms of, profit's good because profit is God's gift to you to help the poor with. That is, if you do that. But in America, those moral values are basically were written out of the concepts of capitalism. And that is, profit is good and more profit is better even if it comes at the expense of the social fabric. So, again, like my Marxist friends do not believe that capitalism can be moral. I'm saying, well, Adam Smith thought it could be. But maybe that's just a head trip. So chattel slavery, you could buy a human female, rape her, and then sell her children, your offspring, at will, at a profit, and not feel anything about it. So this meme then becomes that people are property, and i.e. human resources, not relatives. Okay? The land isn't the land, not a spiritual being in itself. It's a commodity to be bought and sold. Human beings have worth. The richer they are, the more worth they have. The poorer they are, the less worth they have. Right? Comes straight out of slavery. Out of this view of capitalism, where you're building inequities into the system. All right, so American style. So in America and other heirs of European culture, racism was wedded to capitalism, and then within the tenets of Romanized Christianity. Now, I'm not saying just Roman Catholicism, but Romanized Christianity. So we discover the non-Christian world, and it's our property because God said so. If we baptize them first, it's okay to kill non-white children or sell them into slavery. So, for example, Irish and Scots people were not considered white then either. They were considered heathen and pagan and sold into slavery alongside blacks in West Indies, etc. Okay, the Highland clearances was one example of this. So the Highland Clearances is not a clothing sale. It is ethnic cleansing in the British Isles. God said it's okay. So the idea of what happened to black slaves did not just happen to black slaves, it happened to what we would call white people too, at the same time. Right? And that's kind of been erased from history as well. Right? Because a lot of people, yeah, well, I'm Irish and Scottish, so do you understand, have you ever heard of the Highland Clearances? Well, no. Well, what happened? Did we talk about the Riot Act? Okay, so many of the features that we have today in American law came from this time, which during the colonial period, which was preceded by the British colonial period, because America was essentially a British colony. So one of the things that happened during this time is the Irish and Scots people had not been converted necessarily to Christianity all the way through. So Britain is called, let's get away from the slavery thing for a second and then return to it. Britain means land of cows or cattle. You know that statement that George W. Bush is all hat and no cattle? Cowboy, all hat, no cattle? Okay, you're really a real cowboy if you have cattle, right? Well, Britain, land of cattle, your wealth was determined by the size of your herd, okay? Because cows gave you milk, cows gave you leather, etc., etc. More cows you had, wealthier you were, okay? But the Irish and Scots people could not own the land. The land was owned by the king, right? So this is feudalism before capitalism, so they do have money. So money was this silver was the metal, but it was called mail. All right? So the Irish and Scots people had to pay rent with their mail. Now what would happen is that the English would rustle the cattle. And so then they would have to buy their own cattle herd back with the rent money. Hence the term black mail. Okay, and what's blackmail today? Paying money to do something, wait, you already had it, or to keep you from releasing information, but that was where the term came from. This practice, blackmail, where you had to buy your own cattle back that were stolen by the British landlords. Now, if you protested this, so for example, Irish and Scots people are known for a particular type of cloth which is woven and colored in a certain pattern, which is called what? A tartan.
Yeah, flat.
Okay?
Flat.
So, it was illegal to wear tartan. It was illegal to speak Gaelic. All right? And sometimes by wearing tartans or speaking Gaelic, you could be killed. So when they read you the Riot Act, what the Riot Act was you can't, in 3 or more is a riot. When you're protesting having to buy your cattle back, raising your voice, that's a riot. 3 or more, that's a riot. Wearing tartan, speaking Gaelic, is a riot. Raising your voice is a riot. So, for example, in the Highland Clearances, which was ethnic cleansing, you kill all the men, and then you sell the women and children into slavery. Where would you do that? Where would they go? The West Indies or America. Which is why you have Gaelic-speaking people in Jamaica today with red hair. Because once you sell them into the West Indies, into slavery, no British gentleman, no British landowner or plantation owner is going to marry an Irish slave. It's beneath him. So who are they going to intermarry with? Oh, well, the black people. Which is why, yeah, you have Gaelic-speaking, red-haired, and mixed-race black people in Jamaica and the West Indies today because of this practice of the British selling Irish and Scots people after genocidal wars and all that other kind of stuff into slavery. So again, this is another hidden history. The Riot Act, 3 or more, etc. It's a fascinating history. And God, of course, said it's okay to do this, so. Back to slide. Thank you. Or we said, God said it's okay. Whoever we is. So I want to start talking about a certain tradition. The Njuka Maroons who were inhabiting northern South America, in Suriname among others. There are 3 Maroon leaders. So Maroon society, Maroon means wild and free in the Taino language, and it refers to specifically descendants of African slaves who escaped slavery and started free societies. So slaves can escape slavery, but they can't necessarily, unless they know how to create a free society, they're going to replicate the society that Massa created. But Maroons actually took that a step farther and actually created actual republics. That is, where you defend yourself militarily against foreign incursion, and that means the slavers. So this happened in a number of places. So every place there was chattel slavery in the Americas had a Maroon society, whether they called themselves that or not. So there are 3 Maroon leaders in front of the White House. Njuka, the brother on the left from Suriname, a Seminole, which notice that he's wearing Western garb, right? So Seminole basically literally means a mixture of black and Native Americans. That's what the word means in their language. And basically people black slaves who fled in the swamps and then intermarried with the native people there. Yeah.
So the Seminoles weren't an original Native American tribe?
Right. They were probably like Creeks.
Right. I always thought that, yeah.
Yeah. Because the Creeks were all through, Alabama's a Creek word.
Okay.
Georgia is named after George, right?
Mm-hmm.
Florida is a native word, as is, Tennessee, Cherokee, was actually a Cherokee city, Tennessee, right? So all those weird sounding names that can't be English, those were Native American words. Tuscaloosa, Tuscarora.
So Seminoles would be a combination of an original Native American tribe and escaped black slaves.
Yeah,
basically.
yeah. And a Jamaican Maroon.
So,
yeah.
About how old would you say that is?
From the time of the Spanish. And, because it's the Spanish that are bringing folks in there first. And older, right? So they're escaping Mexico, they're escaping into Florida, where, the Spanish are. And it's the Seminoles that caused the Spanish to sell Florida to the British because they couldn't get them out. Yeah.
I think that was 15th or 16th century.
Right.
Will Sarvis covers that in his history class.
Yes. Right. Yeah, exactly. So we saw the Njuka Maroon. That's from Suriname. This is Moortown in Jamaica, which is a basically modern day picture, though you can't necessarily see the settlement or the city, but that's what town where. So maroon. So Africans are not strangers to firearms. Actually, we had been trading with the Chinese long before Marco Polo, and some of us had 50 years, firearms 50 years before Europeans brought them to Africa. So we're not strangers to diplomacy or warfare with Europeans, and not strangers to exploration. So maroonage was one particular response to slavery. It has particular power because in the case of the Republic of Palmares in Brazil and other quilombos, quilombo is Brazilian, Portuguese, or a native word for a fortified city. So Palmares was the largest of the quilombos, and there are some quilombos today. So you can defend basically a land base. And you could escape into Indian country, so Mexico, the whaling industry, shipping industry, or piracy. These were some of the responses to slavery and some of the havens. So Indian country, Mexico, whaling industry, shipping, or piracy. So, arr, matey. So, despite, yeah, go ahead, Eddie.
Would their ability to organize maroon republics be kind of an echo or remnant of the ancient African legal structures way back in Kemet time? That could be like an epigenetic impulse?
Yes, it could be. Particularly, and I'm not sure if I have it here, but it should be here, Nanny and the Maroons. So Nanny was a warrior queen, but also an elder in Jamaica. So she's on the Jamaican $500 bill. So she told African stories, and then also organized warfare against the British. And basically, I think later on this slide also talks about kind of what that response is. But let's get through this brother here first. So, one response to slavery was piracy. There were no all-white pirate crews, Disney notwithstanding. Historical record doesn't indicate there were all-white pirate crews. Like nowhere, never, not happening. Okay, so one African pirate captain, Lawrence de Graaf, who was a Dutch citizen, was captured and enslaved by the Spanish, and managed to capture and take over most of the fleet that had enslaved him before it got to Cuba. In fact, in the record of slavery, there was 150 documented slave rebellions at sea on slave ships. Now, some of them were successful, and here's what I mean by successful. Successful means you free yourself, you kill the crew, all of them, and you sell yourself back to Africa. So there were a few of those. Amistad was a failed rebellion because they failed to kill the crew. They let the crew live, and the crew deceived them instead of, at night, the Africans, like it's depicted in the Steven Spielberg movie, though I don't necessarily always trust Steven to tell the entire story the way we would tell it. At least in Amistad, he got part of it right, where at night, the Africans would sail themselves accurately back to Africa, and by day, the crew would sail them back towards the American coast. So at night, they're sailing back to Africa, and by day, they're sailing back to the American coast, and they go zigzagging up the coast from Cuba until they get caught in Connecticut, and then have that adventure, which we'll talk about when we get to the 1800s here. So Lawrence de Graaf. So this brother is actually acting out Lawrence de Graaf's part. So Lawrence de Graaf, arguably the most talented and feared corsair. Corsair is another name for pirate. Usually corsairs are Arab or Muslim pirates off the coast of Africa. So this is basically, the convention of referring to a black person or a darker person of color as a corsair or a Moor. Nearly a quarter century, his name, whether pronounced Laurencio in the Spanish or simply Lorenz, was whispered in awe and dread whenever a strange sail approached, and was included in the prayers and petitions of many Spanish coastal towns in Mexico and elsewhere. So far more successful than Kidd or Blackbeard, Lawrence is nonetheless far less famous than either. This is from a private paper written by Ken Kinkor, who's historian of the Whydah, which is the only pirate shipwreck excavated to date. So what happened with de Graaf? So he was an ex-slave, was also knighted by the French as Major Lawrence Corneille Baldrin Sieur de Graaf, Lieutenant of Duroc in l'Isle de Saint-Dominique. Dominique is now known as Haiti. Captain de Frégate Léger, Chevalier de Saint Louis. So, what I didn't say about him, here's where de Graaf came from. He was a French citizen, Dutch citizen, captured and enslaved by the Spanish, took over the slave ship that took, there's like 3 ships in the fleet, and he took them over, one by one. And from then on, he didn't sail himself back to, he's like from Cape Verde, I think. Cape Verde Islands, some island off the coast of Africa. And from then on, he didn't sail himself back to Africa. From then on, he basically, let's say he was enthusiastic about Spanish slavers in particular. And so he would find them, seek and destroy them, and basically give the slaves the choice of joining him or joining the crew in death. Want to be free, live free, or do you want to die? So, his fleet naturally would grow with slave ship, because if you're seeking out Spanish slavers, yeah. So he never lost a battle at sea, even when hopelessly outnumbered, and was only defeated once on land. In 1695, when an Anglo-Hispanic, that is, 2 enemies, the British and Spain, invaded Haiti, okay, which was a French colony at the time, right? Force of 3,200 folks. So he wasn't captured, but his wife and children were. And he was shipped to France, accused of treason in the defeat. Wait, he's outnumbered. The French, he's basically got his pirate crew. The French aren't coming to his aid, even though it's a French colony. So they blame him for losing the battle because they weren't sending troops to back it up. And accuse him of treason. Yeah, right. The French wouldn't have won in any case, but they needed a scapegoat, and the brother is the scapegoat, right? So his success as a pirate financially was unmatched by any historical pirate, not of his race, though the white ones, of course, made ink and infamy heated. So he particularly targeted Spanish shipping, and after his court-martial in France, he was allowed to retire in what was then French territory, but is now Biloxi, Mississippi, and buried in an unmarked grave, I think. This is a graphic I asked Ken for, basically showing the deck of a pirate ship. And again, it was his material that suggested, well, no, there's no all-white cruise. That's Disney. Blacks escape slavery by going into piracy, among other things, and the whaling industry and other things. So the symbolism, death and rebirth on the account. So jolly in Old English meant brave, like for he's a jolly good fellow, or also the Jolly Roger. So the idea behind, the symbolism behind this flag here. Obviously, the skull means death, but the two femurs, the crossed femurs, mean standing up on your own. Because basically, well, as you'll see, symbolism of the pirate flag represents death and rebirth. So this is an African theme that we've seen with the Njuka Maroons. Death and then rebirth. Because it's a cycle. Death because pirates saw themselves as being dead to oppressive colonial and European societies. They also knew it was certain death to be captured by any quote-unquote civilized power other than the ones who occasionally hired them to attack enemy shipping, like with de Graaf. The French enlisted him to attack the Spanish, etc., etc. Okay, so the crossed thigh bones represented rebirth, standing free on your own 2 feet. So pirate ships were floating democracies in the old school sense of democracy. Every member of the crew had voting rights while on the account. The account, basically, every crew member had an equal share of all captured goods. The crew could override the captain's decision by a vote. And so, again, so the captain owned the ship, but the crew basically determined, okay, where are we going with the ship? So no historical record of an all-white pirate crew. And all European powers on the ocean also were racially mixed societies, too. So often had mixed race people within their navies, depending. So people of color, who were not often rich, basically had few options, so piracy was definitely one of the ways you could be free. So piracy, you know, within as a form of social protest. So the revolutionary formula, the French revolutionary formula of liberty, equality, fraternity, is expanded to include the concept of transnationalism. That is, we're not part of any nation or part of many nations. Pirates still fit this paradigm, insofar as they were far less divided by national, religious, and racial differences than were Europeans, who were basically allied with nation states. They were caught in a web of institutionalized, dynastic, national, religious, or racial hatred. So a dynasty, essentially, hey, you're loyal to the king and the king's family no matter what they do, or no matter whether they're right or wrong. This multiculturalism then sprang not from materialist, idealistic sentiments or of the brotherhood of man, but a pragmatic spirit of revolt against common oppressors like the European powers, the colonial powers. So while disempowered groups are typically disunited and at odds with each other, going on the account, i.e. piracy, was an empowering act which could lead to the partial dissolution of social differences. Yeah?
All in the same boat.
All in the same boat, right, right. So prior to the French Revolution, rejection of monarchical authority meant rejection of national allegiance. You go against the king's considered the country. You go over against king and country, queen and country, well, you're no longer a citizen. In a speech attributed to Samuel Bellamy, a pirate, probably actually delivered by Paul Grave Williams, another pirate captain claimed leadership as legitimate as that of any king. I am a free prince, and I have as much authority to make war on the whole world as he who has 100 sail of ships at sea and an army of 100,000 men in the field. And this my conscience tells me. This is from Daniel Defoe, Robinson Crusoe fame. Captain Dirk Chivers and his compatriots acknowledged no countrymen said that they had sold their country and were sure to be hanged if taken, and they would take no quarter, that is, no mercy, and would do all the mischief they could. The only nation many pirates claimed was the deck below their feet, and if asked from whence they hailed, a likely reply was, "From the seas." And as late as 1785, a mulatto and 3 white shipmates seized a schooner bound to perform on a cruise in defense of ourselves and against all other nation and nations. So a cruise is crossbones. So cross or a crucible. Severe trial or ordeal, a place or set of circumstances where people or things are subjected to forces that test them and often make them change. One word meaning several things. Where have we seen that before? This must be the Afro-European section. So tell me about this particular picture. What do you see? Yeah.
Obviously, dark skin,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of an Eastern style headdress, of some sort.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Sort of, Arabic or Middle Eastern so-called.
Yeah, could be. Yes.
Armed with a dagger,
Mm-hmm.
kind of almost regal sort of robes.
Yep. Yeah, leopard, looks like. Yep. And you're thinking the Middle Eastern because of the Ibrahim Ganabal thing.
Oh, the truth.
And the turban, sure. Yeah. Well, pretty close, but no cigar. So, Afro-European. So Ibrahim Ganabal is Alexander Pushkin's grandfather. Who he is the page, if you will, of Peter the Great of Russia. Yeah, I know. Doesn't that blow your mind? All right. So in one sense,
These dudes got around.
yeah. Well, okay. So Peter the Great's page, which, all right, if this were a slave, right, he wouldn't dress him like that. Even if he was at court. And you don't send him to French military school either. Which is why he's got arms. Right? So, he's a page in the court of the Tsar, Peter the Great. And then Alexander Pushkin, the Russian poet's grandfather. Yeah.
A page was like a personal assistant to
Yes.
some superior
Yes.
royal force or whatever,
Right.
PA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Personal assistant. Yeah. Right. So Afro-European. So this is a picture of Pushkin on the right. From Africans in Europe to African Europeans. So that's where I get that nomenclature. So Pushkin is Russia's beloved poet, the grandson of the Tsar's Ethiopian page, whom the Tsar sent to French military schools, as I said before. Then Alexander Dumas, the French author, notice his afro. And Dumas' father, Thomas, was a general who fought before Napoleon, but fought under Napoleon's command, and Napoleon dissed him. But it's another story. But here we go. Thomas Dumas, Alexander's father, a general in Napoleon's army. Now, there's a book that I had some summer reading in between breaks from doing this class called The Black Count, which is basically a biography of Thomas Dumas. He was the son of a white French nobleman and a black slave in, I believe it was Haiti or a French colony. And one of the things that happens in French society and was happening in French society then is mixed race persons enjoyed a kind of dual status. So if they were lighter skinned or if they were the family of nobles, so what would often happen is, like his father, He could have left a family in France, but basically in the colonies, he raised a sugar plantation, and Thomas was the result of that union with one of his slaves, a slave mistress, and when Dad goes back to France, he actually has a French ship captain smuggle, more or less, Thomas back to Paris, where once he's on French soil, he's not a slave anymore, he's free, but black. Okay, so there's second-class status, but your dad's essentially a nobleman, so this makes you a count. I know, it's weird, right? But there it is, right? So rather than use his father's name, he used his mother's name, Dumas, and basically enlisted in the army. Now, because he was a nobleman, he could have automatically been an officer. But he decided to start over in the infantry and learn swordsmanship and horsemanship. And one of the things about Dumas, he was a soldier, and his men loved him. Because this is the kind of cat, when he's leading a charge, he's at the front. And everybody has to run to get to where he is. And he did stuff like single-handedly capture 16 guys by himself at sword point. Like, regularly. And he did stuff like, they're having this battle and he's, rushing ahead of his column. And he's holding a bridge by himself until reinforcement come for 45 minutes while wounded from being shot, holding a bridge by himself. So when he dies when Alexander's 4. But, he's hearing about his father, and that's where the Three Musketeers came from.
It was his father.
It was his father. The Count of Monte Cristo was when Thomas was coming back from Egypt. So, get this. Napoleon decides, France is going to be like the new Rome. We're going to conquer all this stuff, and we're going to go conquer Egypt. So he takes a fleet of ships with, horses and all that kind of stuff, and they're going to invade Egypt in the summer while his troops are wearing woolen clothing in the summer in Egypt and no water or food for the horses, let alone his troops. He's thinking, we'll just conquer it. We'll go through this, easy conquest, and we'll just live off the fat of the land like other armies have, including water. Wait, you're going to a desert in summer, your soldiers are wearing wool, and you ain't even got enough water? Okay, and so when the Egyptians, they're going up against these trained warriors called the Mamelukes, who have a particular sword. The Marine sword is a Mameluke sword. And these cats, basically they had each one of them was kind of in terms of being badass, they had helpers around them. And so they struck fear in the hearts of most armies that faced them, except Dumas said, no. Okay, first of all, you're facing a line of cavalry. What you guys should be doing is doing this, this, and this, which they're not. So he just leads a charge straight into them and wipes them out because they don't form a wedge. They're, scattered because they're not unified because they think, each one of us is bad enough to take on 3 guys on horseback, which maybe they would be if you're talking about the folks that, are in Egypt or in Africa, but no. And when they first saw Dumas, they're going, wow, this 6'8" guy, horseman, black guy, must be the leader of the army. not shrimpy Napoleon, who's pale and sickly, and so the people, are just celebrating Dumas, and Napoleon's like, wait, I'm the general, right? So what happened is, they leave, and Dumas basically gets lost or captured and is held on this island for a number of years, and Napoleon, they don't even know, they thought the ship sank, and so they were captured, and then finally they get word, and so he's been held on this island in these desperate conditions, and that was the basis for the writing The Count of Monte Cristo. So again, Dumas writing about not only the Three Musketeers, about his dad, but also about the Count of Monte Cristo being his dad too. There's also a book, one of Dumas' first books called George, was basically a mythical island in the Indian Ocean where these racial tensions are being played out, and that was his actual first novel. But very few people hear about that one. They're more familiar with the Three Musketeers. Yeah.
So his father smuggled him back to France, even though he was illegitimate, technically.
Yeah, he was illegitimate, and basically convinced a sea captain to bring him in as his, son or something like that.
So the father loved the son. He didn't abandon him.
He didn't totally abandon him, but yeah, he sent for him, but not for his mom. Which, Thomas didn't forgive him for that, so he took his mom's last name instead of his dad's last name and started over in the infantry. But, he's still technically a count because of who he is. Hence the Count of Monte Cristo.
Right. Which obviously shaped his character, that whole experience.
Yeah.
Being rescued, but losing his mother and all
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So anyway, The Black Count. I mean, it's a great book. Great read. This is Old High German. So languages changed, right? Just like the English of Shakespeare's time, King James Version of the Bible, and Sound Furstenberg, Reichlich von Meldig, Verstag von Kempten, the year 1728. This is a motto for this royal family. Now, I used to go in more detail about where this is, but I'll just explore the imagery with you now. This you can recognize as European heraldry. The only people who get heraldry are noble-born people. So,
excuse me, what's heraldry?
Heraldry is like a shield, a family crest. You basically put it over the door in the Great Hall. It basically symbolizes kind of your story. And it'd be just like, in African terms, like a shield that you decorate and, talks about your history and all that kind of stuff. Heraldry. So a herald is basically somebody who announces a king. Right? So that's a herald, or a herald will also be a messenger announcing the king's intention before we're about to kick your ass, in battle, etc. So heraldry is the concept. Family crest.
Like an historical emblem.
A historical emblem, right. So, part of the story, the backstory behind this, all right? So, the Spanish Inquisition is happening. So, we are oppressing and basically either converting by the sword or torturing black Jews, Moors, who are Muslim, and also black Catholics. So they're Catholic, and they're part of the religion that's oppressing them, but they have to leave. So these black Catholics had money. And so what they did is they left Spain to go to Spain's northern colonies, the Holy Roman Empire. Now the Holy Roman Empire is like Holland, Luxembourg, Belgium, the Netherlands, Austria, Germany. You get me. So, all right, when they come up to Europe, the Holy Roman Empire, right, they got money. So if you're a German landowner and this handsome black prince comes up with gold, Could you find him a marriageable daughter? You think? Maybe? Possibly? He got more money than you and a marriageable daughter, that'd be a good match, and you can buy land, pay cash money. Yeah, you would do that. Well, would this happen once or many times since the 1400s? Lots. Lots. Okay? So, here's an example of that. So European heraldry, it's a male-dominant society, so in patriarchy, so dad is at the top of the crest, right? And so here's dad wearing a jalaba, okay, which is not German folk dress. It's North African folk dress. He's saying he's a Moor or he's black. African, right? So he's got, so understand the way he's looking at it. In his left hand, which is your screen right, he's got the scepter of royal authority. And in his right hand, he's got the sword saying, I got backup. Right? And you can see his suntan. That's not an artifact of copying machine. And you can see his hairstyle, like Dumas. Right? And he's standing on a helmet from a suit of armor. Okay? To his right, the sword, is the crown and mitre of Catholicism. Right? Like a pope. Also resting on the helmet from a suit of armor. See that? Okay? And left side, resting on the helmet from a suit of armor, the horns of a Viking. Right? With also a sword. So notice there's swords next to the crown and mitre and next to the horns of the Viking. Right? And then below on the shield, that's mom. Dad is standing at the top, the head of the family, head of the household, and on the shield also is mom. So mom's a Viking. So they're both of royal blood, and they're both warriors. Now, first generation black-white mix. What color is the kid likely to be? Because you can't have a dynasty, a royal dynasty, without kids. And both parents have to be of royal blood, or noble blood. Right? Okay. So what color would the kids be?
Brown, light brown.
Brown, light brown? What kind of food substance is light brown and sweet?
Chocolate.
Caramel, chocolate.
Chocolate, caramely, what else? Really sweet.
Brown sugar.
Brown sugar's not bad, it's close. Sweeter than brown sugar.
Honey?
Honey! Yes. And how do you say honey in German? Yeah, why am I leading you on with all these hints? Yeah, why don't I just show you? Well, guess wrong slide. Okay, let me translate the German for you. God's helmet is Anselm. Anselm Furstenberg, Reichlich von Meldig, Fürstlich von Kempten. Defending our kingdom, Reichland. The kingdom of the Meldeg, honeyed dark ones. Fürstlich von Kempten, we are the fighters. Okay, defending our kingdom, the kingdom of the honeyed dark ones, like Ethiopian honeyed countenance. We are the fighters. Yeah, looks like it. Okay, yeah, so Beethoven, drawn from life in charcoal at age 44 by Latrone. This is in Roger's Sex and Race. So when I show this, then people say, oh, well, that's just a bad copy. He's not black. Well, yeah, he was. According to the white people at the time, who called him mulatto. In fact, his student basically was quoted as saying, his face where he had not shaved made the already brown part of his face still darker. Right? So 5 o'clock shadow on a brown face. Yeah, okay. Brown face, mulatto, and that's how white Germans are describing him. Germany's not a tanning destination. All right? So, yeah, if I show you black noble families and Beethoven and a black Queen of England and Schwarzkopf and Schwarzenegger, hello, they're black Germans. And then if I show you the family crest of other people from France and Italy and Austria, et cetera, that are calling themselves black, hello. Just saying, Afro-Europeans. So there's a quote by Esterházy regarding Haydn, who was Beethoven's teacher. And the story was, Esterházy was a Prince of Austria. Haydn composed a piece of music, and in the Allegro, Esterházy, bring forth the composer. Haydn steps forth, and basically Esterházy says, what? This music is by this blackamoor? Blackamoor meaning a black person. Now, what's your name? Joseph Haydn. Henceforth thou art in my service. And this is in a biography of Beethoven. So basically he's saying Esterházy's remark basically establishes Haydn is black, and he uses this incident at Kismart in the Royal Palace to say that Beethoven had more of the moor, that is, he was darker, than Haydn was. So if Haydn's dark enough to be called blackamoor by an Austrian prince, boom, and Beethoven's darker, what are you going to conclude there? Right? Number of biographers, including a Kitty biography published by Scribner's in '76, describe Ludwig as swarthy, which literally the Latin swarth, dark skin, dark complected, mulatto, already brown faced by Carl Cerny, and a married woman who claimed to be in love with him. So people who were close to him and his ethnic heritage wasn't an issue. And it didn't seem remarkable that a black man was such an accomplished, tortured soul. Tortured at least by the short summer and gloomy winters, but hey. Yeah?
Would that degree of tolerance have been typical of the German population?
Well, that tolerance was mixed, as we'll see with like Andres Solomon, which I'm only going to have time in the last 4 minutes to talk about Charlotte. So this is Charlotte Mecklenburg-Strelitz. Notice what's at her left hand. It's a crown. Okay? NPG 224, NPG is the National Public Gallery in London. National Portrait Gallery, in London. So, this is George III's queen. This painting was commissioned by her parents when she's 17. She's 17 in this picture. What? You quit? Don't do that. Come back. How dare you? Let's see, draft. Anyway, okay, Charlotte. Yes? 2 minutes, thank you. Here we go. How dare you quit like that? All right, Charlotte Sophia Mecklenburg-Strelitz. German princess of African descent, traced her royal lineage from the House of Portugal, Royal House of Portugal. She married George III, the George that Thomas Jefferson is talking about doing slavery, becoming Queen of England. Queen Victoria was her granddaughter. Queen Elizabeth, the current queen, is a distant relative. So yes, I am saying a black woman, a mulatto woman, sat on the throne of England. Places in the New World, named after her: Charlotte, North Carolina, in Mecklenburg County. Okay? Yeah, this is a portrait of George and the kids. They went on to have 15 kids together. Okay, so here you have 6 showing and 1 in the oven. So history books talk about George being taken aback by her lack of beauty, but she's also referred to by a royal genealogist as the monkey-faced little princess. So, monkey-faced, huh? Monkey-faced. Yeah, okay. Kind of cute there. So, nose and lips, monkey. Okay, they're saying she's black. So we'll continue this in a week. Remember, we're not back for a week.